Thanks, Ed. Anybody want to start with the first question? Or we can start with one we got from online. All right, I will start with one of our online questions. Since you were talking a lot about entrepreneurship, we got a lot of questions from people interested in that topic. First one, will you support encouraging trade between Tampa and Cuba? And if so, what are the specific steps in your plan?
Two candidates in this race, Tom Scott and I, have said opening up trade with Cuba would be on top of our agenda. The other candidates have said that's not the case. Here's how we go forward, in my opinion. Within 90 days, I would like to lead a local, hopefully federal and state official trade delegation, or be part of one, to go visit with the Cuban government to talk about ways that we can start taking advantage of existing laws to trade with Cuba. That's number one. Number two, and this is rooted in our history, no city has closer ties with Havana and Cuba than Tampa. We have a deep history and a deep tradition that goes way back before Miami. In fact, Miami, I don't even think was around at the time. When we bring this topic up during the campaign, a couple of officials, Bob Buckhorn, Dick Greco, and Rose Verlita, say that's foreign policy, and we can't deal with foreign policy here. But I think it's pretty clear that foreign policy is framed in Little Havana and in South Florida. It's all about electoral politics. And I've already had discussions with people in the Central Florida area who are interested with trade in Cuba. A lot of businesses here are interested in trade in Cuba. And if we work together and say it is in the economic interest of Central Florida and Tampa Bay to have trade with Cuba, I think foreign policy starts changing, because foreign policy, in my opinion, follows electoral policy. At the end of the day, I don't want to be insensitive to the plight of the Cubans, but we as a nation trade with the People's Republic of China. In fact, it is the largest trading partner of our port. We trade with Vietnam. 50,000 young men and women from America died there. We trade with those countries. In my opinion, free trade results in freedom. And the way to liberate Cubans from whatever their government is to do free trade that encourages their own economic prosperity.
Thanks, Ed. Another question on entrepreneurship that came in. Throughout history, entrepreneurship has been the leading driver of net job creation in the U.S. Please describe your strategy for creating a sustainable ecosystem of entrepreneurship in Tampa Bay. If you don't have one, are you open to collaborating with local entrepreneurs who do?
It's how does government create entrepreneurship? There's no easy answer to that, because it sort of happens. One of the first things it can do is get out of the way to allow people who want to create, who want to invest, to make it easy to do so. A lot of entrepreneurship, and I think, Joel, you correct me, it was a Kauffman Center?
Kauffman Foundation.
Kauffman Foundation did a study of job creation in America. And last year, 1 million jobs were lost by large corporations, and 3 million jobs were created by startup companies. Simple things, although it is brick and mortar, simple things like places and spaces lowers the threshold for people to invest. People talk about co-working space, opportunities in creating venues to make it easy for entrepreneurs and creative people to work together. One of the opportunities for that may be the old federal courthouse. The local chapter of Tampa Bay AIA has talked about taking that over. And the notion of co-work is people from different disciplines working in the same spot, renting in the same spot, but collaborating on a case-by-case basis. So it's that wide-ranging open network that you want to try to facilitate. Again, government can't force people to do that, but its role is to facilitate it. there's some big projects, of course, that we hear out there, like Jackson Labs, which it makes sense for USF is partnering with them to try to land that here. And that doesn't necessarily spill off directly into individual startups or entrepreneurship on its own. But once you land something like a Jackson Labs, the spin-offs are dramatic and happen in unpredictable ways. The other thing is clustering is very important. Being able to create clusters of specialty so that you attract talent that connects to areas like biomed, like defense and cyber technology, and there's a lot of spin-offs that come from that.
That was my question.
Okay, I just took Joseph's question here. Next question. Would you propose a dedicated funding source for economic development? If so, what types of sources would you be in favor of?
Well, it's a good question. It's unlikely that the city of Tampa is going to have any huge pot of money for economic development because that's not its traditional role. Rick Scott, to his credit, and Lord knows I've been critical of him on high-speed rail, but to his credit, he's saying, let's create an $800 million economic development fund in the state budget. And that would be allocated through economic development councils and Enterprise Florida to attract new industries here. So the right conduit is tapping into funds at the state level and channeling them to strategically significant endeavors like a Jackson Labs. The city's role in dealing with any new major startup or economic development would really probably be in the areas of infrastructure development. Stormwater, sewer, all those sorts of things which are traditional municipal functions but are nonetheless very meaningful for someone who wants to relocate here and start a business. It goes right to their bottom line. So it shouldn't be discounted, but that's the area that we can do the most in. However, I'll go back to places and spaces. I think it's appropriate for the city to invest in these common area developments that will facilitate the very small entrepreneur in growing their business. A 1 or 2 or 3 person shop isn't looking for $1 million. They're looking for an easy permit and no hassle so they can open up their business and get on with that without dealing with a lot of government red tape or regulation.
Thanks. We've got a question.
Ed Allen Snell with SwiftBud. As you know, Tampa and the metropolitan area has received a black eye for being a killer city of bicyclists. It's quite an embarrassment. I think it's shameful for the city to be known as the place where bicyclists get killed. We just had another bicyclist killed on Fletcher Avenue a week ago, run down by a speeding motorist. What specifically will you do to get police to crack down on aggressive drivers who imperil the lives of bicyclists? And what specifically will you do on the streets of Tampa to give more bike lanes, shared road markings, signage to... We're not even talking about bicycle transportation. We're just trying to stay alive here. Why has Tampa dragged its feet for so long on this issue?
I cannot attest to why we've dragged our feet so long. I've been a proponent of bicycling a long time. When I was a county commissioner, I actually commuted by bicycle till I gave it up because it was too dangerous. I think that the very first thing that has to happen at both the city and the county is there needs to be a very aggressive law enforcement campaign coupled with a pretty aggressive public education campaign to say motorists, don't screw around with bicyclists. They have every right to be on the road as you do. And we, maybe in some respects, what's happening with bicyclists and the attitudes of motorists to them, and maybe harken back, although it's different, to the days where domestic violence used to be okay. But we changed our rules and policies and we said we're not going to have we're going to have zero tolerance for domestic violence. I think likewise we have to have zero tolerance for motorist behavior to bicyclists to endanger them and get very tough on that from an education and law enforcement perspective. The second thing was, I think, right here and now, we work with the biking community to figure out routes that are going to work for them, for people to use, and do really bold marking on them. Make it very clear that this is, this is a bike safe zone, or whatever the biking community says is necessary to happen. Ultimately goes back to the need for a region-wide comprehensive multimodal plan. I talked at the beginning of my comments about having a regional rail transit system built around the CSX lines. I like the notion of rails and trails, that when we buy the CSX lines, some 100 miles of them, by the way, that when we develop those for rail transit, we also develop those with bikeways. And the nice thing about that is that the rail lines have very few grade crossings, which means that the bicyclists who would commute in them likewise would have a safe envelope in which to travel. That's why Pinellas Trail has been so successful. You have a very safe environment, and they started off, everything was at grade. They bought that rail line, everything was at grade, and over time, they've gradually done overpasses. I don't think it's something you can do right away, but once you get into this, a serious multimodal transportation system, where you got this rail system that connects to a lot of pieces, and a bus system that connects to it, bikes become an integral part of personal mobility. The culture changes, the priority changes, the precedence changes. So when you go to Europe, as you know, you'll find out that bikes predominate and not cars, and cars give way to bikes. We obviously aren't there yet, but as in all things, you have to have a vision about how to get there. And I think that's the approach to get there. And I think we're working, by the way, you should follow my website. This Thursday night, what's the date of that? This coming Thursday is the 24th. We're going to join a lot of bikers and do a bike rally for Turanchik. We're going to cruise around the city with green Turanchik shirts on and demonstrate that we think bikes have equal priority on the roadways as cars. So check on the website to see more details about that.